Good morning again. Hope everyone enjoyed the tea break and have enjoyed the presentation so far this morning. At this time, we will have our mock negotiation, which we're going to go through kind of the concerns and considerations of a very early stage startup company, and also the concerns and considerations of an investor. And this time, it'll be a VC interested in investing in such a company. So at this time, it's going to be a panel forum / negotiation. So we're going to have an investor, investors council, company, and companies council, and I will help to moderate the discussion. So please help me in welcoming our participants at this time. I'd like to begin by thanking our esteemed participants, all of which have very significant experience in this realm, in which we will be tapping into in our discussion. We'll try to incorporate some of the related questions that we heard earlier, and then also try to address a lot of the issues that we in our profession come across when speaking with startup companies and venture capitalist firms and other angel investors of the like that are busy in this realm of investments. So I'd like to start by allowing each of our participants to give a short introduction of themselves. We'll start here at the companies table. So we first have our entrepreneur, also an entrepreneur himself, Mr. Wilson Yen, who's a founder and CEO of TFI Digital Media, an award-winning media company here in the area. He has over 20 years of experience in tech and in interaction design. Also is a member of the Co-operatives of Innovative Intellectuals. And we have his counsel as well, Mr. Kenneth Choi, head of technology transactions at Nixon Peabody, also been both in a firm and working as general counsel at a very successful startup company. So if you wanted to add a few words about your experience and kind of as we go through this discussion, and so people can know kind of your standpoint and where you're coming from. We'll start with you, Wilson. Thank you.
Actually, my company start in 2010. Okay, so in the coming December will be the 6 years birthday. And actually my company is I can say a technology company in Hong Kong. We start with only one person, and right now we have about 100 people in Hong Kong. We have about 60 plus engineers. Half of those are actually with postgraduate qualifications. We do video technologies. And luckily, we are actually doing some fundraising right now, IPO fundraising. So what actually we are going to discuss is actually a real case of both my company and also I hope it will be a good reference for all of you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jamal. It's my pleasure to be here, and I think that this is a very exciting conference, and the topics are extremely interesting. As for my background, I've been practicing law for 30 years, and both in the US and also in Asia, and I think that about half my time was spent practicing in New York and California for about 12 years before coming to Hong Kong, and I've been practicing here for about 10 years, and I've also served as in-house counsel, as Jamal has mentioned. But in addition to that, I am also a failed entrepreneur. Back in 2000, I had started co-founded a technology company, and we ran great for a few years, and then ran out of funds. And so I think that as someone who's been in your shoes, I think that hopefully it gives me better insight of pointing out some of the lessons that you can learn, regardless whether you're successful or not as successful. I think that oftentimes when you're not as successful, you probably are able to learn a lot more than if everything goes smoothly for you. So I hope to share some of that insight with you as well.
Thank you. I think that's also a great point to make early on, that I'd say maybe 90% of the successful entrepreneurs out there at some point were failed entrepreneurs. So you obviously learn by experience. So I think that's a major point, especially in early stage companies, is that not all you're not going to always have victories. They're not going to always be home runs. But the point is you learn from your mistakes, and maybe it was a good idea in a bad team or a bad idea with a good team, and you find out what fits. So thank you for sharing that. I know a lot of times, especially in conferences, a lot of people want to focus on the successes, but I think that may even be more important. So on to our investors table. Our investor will be Mr. Joseph Fan. He's the chairman of Eastern Broadcasting Company. He's also a venture partner at W.I. Harper. The venture focuses on digital media, clean energy, and healthcare services throughout Greater China. And Investors Counsel, Mr. Bo Wang, corporate attorney at DLA Piper, located here in its Hong Kong office, focuses on many business transactions from cross-border M&A deals and including early-stage investment deals. So if I could have Mr. Fan, if you'd like to introduce some of your experience a little bit further, and then we'll have Bo afterwards.
Thank you. Good morning. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I think I've been sitting on both sides of the table many times. I founded a few companies, and most of them turned out to be success during my time. But if I think back, we do it all over again today, it's probably not going to happen. I also have a company that didn't really fly, and actually we learned more from our failures than success. I'm associated with a venture capital, and also the company that I'm a chairman of is actually belong to a private equity firm. So I constantly have to switch gears and try to think differently, whether I'm reporting to a private equity partners or a venture capital partners. Hopefully this session will be helpful to those who wish to be entrepreneurs, within an organization or startup totally outside the organization, because we have done both before. Not everybody could be an entrepreneur, but those who want to be an entrepreneur, that we definitely hope this session will be very helpful to you.
Good morning, everybody. I think some of you might have been expecting Mr. Paul Chen to be here. Unfortunately, he can't make it, so you have me instead, but I'll try my best to do as good a job as Paul. I've been personally working in Hong Kong for about 5 years, and even in that 5 years, I've seen a lot of changes in Hong Kong, in particular in the venture capital space. A lot of startups have grown. The nature of business in Hong Kong and in the mainland has changed, and as lawyers, we have had to really change the way we operate, learn to do business with different types of clients and help them make different types of investments. I hope to be able to share some of that experience over the last 5 years with you this morning, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Joseph and Bo. And I will echo Joseph's sentiments that everyone cannot be an entrepreneur. For those of us who cannot, there's always a law degree, and you can get it on that side. So that's the nearest we get to innovation, helping it come to fruition, dealing with all the red tape that more innovative people don't necessarily like to get their hands dirty with. So I guess we should definitely get started. So we're going to start off discussing the company profile. So we are in the realm of early stage financing, Series A, as most people would call it. And we're dealing with, we just have a mock set up. It's not a clean energy or health services company, so Joseph, you're gonna have to navigate the waters of, say, a software as a service company. So very, very common startup software platforms, B2B business. So for instance, in this case, we have a group of co-founders, the CEO of which has had a failed prior entrepreneurial pursuit, and a more successful one. The latter, the successful one, ended in an M&A deal where they sold to a big tech firm named Big Tech, and then that CEO spun out a startup with 3 coworkers from Big Tech into their now SaaS platform company. Their first customer is Small Tech, a growing competitor of Big Tech, and Big Tech, as you see, just to add another layer, is one of the shareholders in the company, one of the early shareholders. So that's the basis of the company, and we just want to keep in mind that startup companies are ever evolving. So one day, or when you're with one investor, you're this. Maybe when you're with another investor, you're that. And it's something to kind of keep in mind as we navigate through this first endeavor to seek investors. And I'm sure that I'd like to pose this to the company at this point. From your experience as being an entrepreneur or within a startup environment, how many times did you have to speak or make pitches to investors before it even got to a serious conversation about term sheet terms and how to proceed from that point? So just if you can give a few experiences about how many pitches it took to get the fish to bite and enough to reel a few times.
I'm lucky. Okay, I spent like maybe 10 times, and then we got like free term sheet from some potential investors. So I'm lucky, but I think those unlucky people, they may get like over 100 times of discussion, and then they may not easily to get one proposed. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that startup companies need to think about before they really deal with investors is to do full preparation. I think that a lot of times people do a lot of pitches, and definitely, while there's plenty of money out there, it is also very difficult to land investors. And I think that for startup companies, some of the things that you need to think about is you have to keep in mind, what do the investors have in mind? What do they want? What do you have to offer to them? And I think that a lot of companies don't really focus on that. I think a lot of companies, and this was touched upon earlier today, is that they think about their core competency, which is required. That is, if I am a SaaS company, I think about my software, I think about my platform, I think about all these things. But from an investor, the core competency is very important. But a company has to be more comprehensive. It's not just one thing. We have, and Ian mentioned this earlier, is that when you think about your core competency, your technology, or your IP, if you will, those are more or less tools that you need. What investors are looking for is a company that will grow, where they can invest and they will be able to have a good chance of making a profit. Because for them, it's a risk. And for the company, for the startup entrepreneur, it is also a risk because you want to find the right partner. If you don't have the right partner, things can go badly in the sense that you'll be devoting too much resources to dealing with your investors, dealing with other things, and losing your focus on your core competency on building your business. So I think that, yes, it's difficult to raise funds, but it makes it easier if you are much more better prepared when you deal with potential investors. And I think that is one thing that entrepreneurs need to keep in mind as they go through this exercise.
That's very good points. Thank you both for that. And on the other side of the coin, Joseph, if you could speak to, essentially in your role as a venture partner, how many ideas, pitches, emails, calls, lunches, dinners you get from entrepreneurs, and how many you actually pull the trigger on, or even see enough to say, let's take that next step, just in terms of ballpark figures of your experience.
This session actually scheduled for about an hour and 15 minutes. Please don't get misled by the time, because you won't get money in an hour and 15 minutes. It usually takes a lot more time, perseverance, and determination. We look at thousands of proposals, ideas, come in all shapes and forms. I'll be honest with you, many of them actually really come in the back of napkins and envelope. It does come that way. all these years, I never really seen a company that fail or startup that fail because their technology or their know-how was lousy. Mostly boils down to the individuals that leads the company, that the teams that they have together. We as venture capital, venture capital, you look at the words, actually it meant creative capitals, creative money. We reward people, we pay people to be creative. And we wanted to invest. We get paid to invest. It's not that we're not on the other side of the fence that we're holding the money and waiting for you to perform. That's just not the way it works. We wanted to see this idea works. And those who successful securing the funding are those who actually religiously believe their idea and they had the determination and demonstrate their perseverance for us. Usually, there's plenty of money out there, right? Why go to W.I. Harper? Why go to these guys? Why go to Sequoias, right? You want to think about whether these people can deliver something else other than money. Everybody else can give you money. Think about if you're working with them as a partner, what else can they help you or to be an alliance for your business and to build your business on? And I think that's a good starting point. Maybe my lawyer can elaborate a little bit.
I completely agree. I actually want to supplement Kenneth's comments. I think it's very important for the company to understand what they are offering to the investor, but I think it's also important for the company to do some due diligence on the investor, understand what sort of investors they ought to be pitching to. Some investors might prefer short-term investments, some might prefer longer-term investments. You will be wasting your time pitching a long-term investment to an investor that has a track record of mostly doing short-term investments. So I think it's important to really understand what you're offering and whether you're offering it to the right type of investor. With respect to my client, yes, I completely agree with your points, but I think also it is about perseverance, but it is also understanding that you have the right product for the right person. It is possibly futile persevering in offering the wrong product to the wrong type of investor.
Great, great. I like all of your points. They're really easy segues to the next point, which is going to be focusing on the investor profile. So not only is the investor profile, as you've heard, important for the actual investor. They need to know what industry they know well, how big their fund is, what their exit strategies are in terms of short-term or long-term, and what their limited partners are expecting in terms of returns and when they make those returns. So in the spirit of an investor profile, that's obviously their concern, but it also, from what I'm hearing, should be a concern of the company as well. It's not enough to just look for a deep pocket. It's just as important to look for a partner or someone with knowledge within your industry so that maybe they can assist you more than monetarily and assist you with talent, assist you with know-how, and give you more than just a check at the closing ceremonies and then say, come back with when you hit the next milestone. So the investor profile, although very important for limited partners and the general partner, is also very important for the company to take into consideration because, as I said, sometimes you can pitch to 100 people and you may get 5 bites. If you could have focused on those 5 that were maybe more likely to invest in a company of your type and cut out, say, 20 or 30, then you have more time further developing your product. You have less money you're spent on travel and pitching and going out. So it's all about being as economical as possible. And from what I'm hearing thus far, it's just the old adage, preparation, preparation, preparation. Know your audience, know where you're looking to, know who you're speaking with, and prepare accordingly. So once we get to the negotiation part, for our mock investor profile, it's going to be the industry of the fund is platforms, software services. So what a coincidence. They love B2B services because they see an exit opportunity and a potential M&A deal somewhat early on from a bigger company that they're providing services to. In addition, and I'm glad that Joseph mentioned this, they're really heavy emphasis on the team. So they know the idea is going to be, there's going to be a threshold of a good idea or not. That's great. But they really, really want to focus on who's your CEO, who's your CTO, who are your engineers, who are the people on the ground now that are on your side before you start having to essentially start paying salaries, and like who is the core team at that position. So that is going to be very important to them when they're making an investment decision. And who knows, maybe they'll take more risk confident with a team. And then maybe we'll find out in the discussions whether the team dynamic is previous success or just their strength and their skills or their perseverance per se. So that is the overarching investor profile. Also, early stage companies, they look to get in early so they can get a good price, and they look to help foster a relationship with the company to bring them along as they see fit. So now we'll move on. We talked about this a little bit, but company considerations. And the investor profile goes into that, but also how you want to package your company. If your strength is your technology and your IP, making sure that's protected before you say go to an investor, because they're going to ask questions about that. In our scenario, we have a company that is, I threw in that big tech as a shareholder just to raise a potential issue that there may be some shared IP, there may be some licensing, there may be a necessary for having IP agreements, or you may need to make sure that they have certain agreements that solidify that the IP is completely separate from big tech, because some investor may not want to get in business with big tech. They just want the startup company. So with that said, I think with the company considerations, I'm going to start with IP, because as a software company, that is very important. And so first, I heard earlier we were talking about how expensive it is to protect your IP portfolio, and as an early stage company, that could be one of your sticking points in terms of paying an attorney to file a patent, or to do the necessary things to make sure your IP is ironclad by the time you're looking for financing. So if we could have, we'll start with the company, and if you have any kind of tips or tricks of the trade of how, and it can be outside of a software as a service company, but if you have any that's relevant to that scenario as well, in terms of getting the best protection for essentially the cheapest price early on.
For a company like in the slide is about a software as a service. I think everyone agree with that. When a product start with an idea, okay, it goes through a process called research and development, and then go to the market, and then we talk about commercialization, productization, and because there are actually more than 10 steps in between. But much more important is from internal discussion, from internal product, and then you go to market, and the market will be like not only for one region, okay, not only in Hong Kong, but also like in the United States, in everywhere. So you need to understand very well about like the patent, how you apply the patent to protect your technology. And much more important is the patent you applied is regional, okay? You need to apply in Hong Kong for one city, and Taiwan will be another city. You need to apply your go-to-market, your strategy, based on your strategy, you need to plan ahead. And yes, very expensive, okay? And much more important is if your product is success, okay, you can get the return, okay? And if not, okay, you need to try another time, okay? But much more important, I can say, to find another very important key customer is important, because it is a B2B. So a good reference case for your product, okay, to prove its success, very important, the key customer in the very beginning is a very important supporting information to your product or your service. So not only protect your product, but also find a key customer in the very beginning. I think this is very, very important. Yeah.
So Kenneth, if you could speak to, from the attorney point of view, in terms of if there are any type of, I don't know if there are any alternative fee arrangements or anything, but from the firms, the dynamics and the economics of the firm, how firms are beginning to better service startup clients and these early stage protections that you would necessarily need to do before you had financing.
Well, I think there are, in terms of IP, there are a lot of considerations. Actually, if I may comment a little bit, Jamal had mentioned before that in the situations such as this company, one of the things that you want to be very, very careful about as a company is whether or not because again, the founders came out from big tech, and the question is who owns what IP. And so I think that's the first thing you need to really understand. And I think that a good law firm, good lawyers should be able to help you go through to see whether or not what your previous IP assignment agreements look like, to see what you can take with you, what you cannot. And so I think in terms of the legal services, the first thing a good lawyer, well, actually, let me back up. The first thing a good lawyer should do for a startup is the lawyer must understand your company, understand your business, understand what you're doing, understand your objectives, understand where you're going with your business. And if a lawyer doesn't really understand that, the lawyer cannot give you the type of advice and support that you need. So the first thing is get a lawyer who understands your business and what you're trying to do. Then the lawyer should help you go through what is available in terms of IP protection. Now, in the area of SaaS, software as a service, well, first of all, in Hong Kong and also in various regions in the Asia-Pacific realm, software is not really patentable. And the protection, and even in the US, I think the general protection is also copyright. And copyright, overall, you can say is much less expensive than patent. It is very different, but nevertheless, it is a one area that your lawyers can look at. Another area that the lawyer can help you with in terms of, let's say you have patents, you need to do filings. Well, one of the things is that you want to plan strategically. Now, as Wilson had just mentioned, the idea is, well, first you start in Hong Kong and then regionally, locally, and then you might go abroad depending on the market situation, depending on product development and so forth. One of the things that may be, one of the tools that may be useful is in terms of filing is to, instead of just immediately filing in as many jurisdictions as you think appropriate, is to plan through various different available systems, such as the PCT, the Patent Cooperations Treaty entities. What that allows you to do essentially is to claim your priority date, put in a claim, and then you can have a period of time before you actually spend a lot of money in going through the processing process, which is extremely expensive, especially if you're going to do a multi-jurisdictional approach. But using devices such as PCT, another device would be, say, a provisional application in the US. All of these tools can help you delay the cost of patenting. And one of the reasons why you want to do that is, again, perhaps market-driven, products-driven, in a sense that, well, you've gotten to a point, let's say a year down the line, you have a pretty good sense of whether or not your product will sell, whether it's going to be successful, whether or not you need to fine-tune, change direction, and so forth. And to use some of these devices that are available will help you delay that cost, so that you have a higher chance of being successful commercially before you actually spend a big money on it. And hopefully by that time, you would have lined up investors to help you defray that cost, to help you pay for that cost. And so in terms of legal services, a good advisor would look at all of these things. I mean, obviously it's not that simple. There are also a lot of other considerations, but a good advisor can help you plan your budget and to help you budget according to your cash flow, according to what you have, and according to your stage of development. So I think that these are some of the things that a good lawyer can help you with.
Thank you. And I think as head of technology transactions at Nixon Peabody, you can appreciate this. I think it's very important to not be, say, fearful of going and having an initial conversation with an attorney before you have any engagement. And maybe I would even, as I probably shouldn't say this as an attorney, but push the envelope and see how much you can get out of that person before they say, hey, maybe we need to get an engagement. Because a lot of times the danger is what you don't know, and what you don't know you need protection for. As a corporate attorney who does deals like this all the time, if a client came to me and said, these are the IP agreements I have, and these are the licensing agreements I have with my former employer for my startup now, the first thing I'm doing is thinking, who's my tech trans guy to look at these? I deal with startup clients and IP protection documents all the time, but they're of a specific nature that as an attorney, I think there should be someone with expertise on. So even if you understand what you're doing, you may not necessarily understand what needs to be done to adequately protect them legally. And I'm saying as a corporate attorney, I defer to my tech trans people to tell me exactly how, if this is protected sufficiently or if we need to do something else. So I would say don't be fearful of making that first contact even before you're engaged, because usually if it's an advisor that you would actually want to work with going forward, because the reality of the situation is attorneys that work with startup companies, there's going to be some give and take. It's not going to be the same as me engaging a large bank and just starting and charging our billable rates. There's going to be some favors done because we're all hoping for the long-term benefit. So if you run up into an attorney that's not willing to give you some advice, at least on a preliminary level, like I don't think you and your team are capable of, say, negotiating this agreement. You will need some help. Maybe we don't have the financial structure to help you, but I will advise you to get some help to some degree. Do not be afraid of doing that, because it's always harder to fix mistakes, especially if it just took a call or an email to see if someone would be willing to do you a favor. And if you have a pretty good idea, you'll get people who are more willing to do favors. Did you want to add to that?
Just a quick comment. I think that we talked about knowing the company profile, knowing the investor profile, and I think Jamel is correct. You also need your professional advisor's profile. Understand whether or not they have the type of background you need and whether or not there's a fit. And a lot of times you also need to shop around in order to find someone that you feel most comfortable with.
So now we'll move on, still in company considerations, but I'd like to take this from the investors table. We're going to be talking about a company, a startup that has a competitive advantage, maybe superior technology or the claim thereof, if it hasn't been necessarily proven at that point, or entering a market that's not really saturated, or entering a saturated market but coming at it from a new position. Joseph, as an investor, do you show any essentially favoritism for any approach to a market, whether it be a place where there's no one yet, or a place where there are established companies and there's a new idea? Do you put any value on having some sort of being kind of late to the party and improving on what's established, or do you kind of tend to lean to newer ideas?
I think for different VC, their consideration or approach might be a little bit different. For myself, we are a lot more open-minded. You don't have to be the first who had that idea. However, as we're on the topic of IP, most of proposition we look at, everybody says patent pending, right? Virtually 99% says that. It pays that if you can present to your investors, say, look, I'm actually having discussion with law firm XYZ on my patent in United States or in EU or in certain markets. That differentiates yourself. As an investor, we look for differentiation, right? Your software solution, why are you better than these other guys, right? And if you're ahead, and how far are you ahead? What good does this solution do to your customer? Would this be easily substituted? Those are the questions we're going to ask you. Why should I put money into this? Also, there's this what we call proof of concept phase. Many people came to us that they have not really gone through a full proof of concept, and they need money to do that. We understand that very much. And it's good to have a plan. So look, we invented this great solution. We have done it, demonstrated, but we still need a more firm proof of concept. And we're scheduled to do that within the next 6 months. That's very helpful. It tells us your determination. It tells us where you are. And also it tells us your confidence level. And by proof of concept, you also will have some opportunity to encounter some of your potential customers. Now, if you don't have a lot of proper IP protection, that's a risk, right? So it pays that you have discussions about your IP. Then it comes to, if you're a latecomer to a particular crowded market, well, don't worry. Apple was a latecomer to come to a mobile phone market. Look what have they done. They changed the game. Right? We're looking for game changers. It doesn't matter you're late to the market. There's hundreds of automobile manufacturers. And if I take a little bit of time, when I was young, automobile was a high-tech business. Well, yesterday I rode in Tesla for the first time, thanks to Ian. And if you are like us, studying engineering, Nikola Tesla was the guy actually invented alternative current. And that's why we have lights like this today. Back when World War II was over, automobile was a booming business in the United States. Every household has a car on their driveway. And the best automobile manufacturer actually was not an American-built automobile company. Right? German car makers, they actually manufactured probably the best cars in the world. And one company, was named Mercedes-Benz, and thought, there are not a whole lot of people in Germany could afford Mercedes-Benz after World War II. And they have to sell it to US. And look at the US. And if you're a Mercedes-Benz marketing executive, you go to US, well, it's too late. Everybody already has a car. Mercedes-Benz raised good cars, and they raised money to do this, and they position themselves as a luxury car. Right? Everybody in US had a family car. If you want to be a luxury car, you buy a Mercedes-Benz. And that was the story. And Mercedes sold more cars in the US than any other German manufacturer. Well, there are more than just Mercedes-Benz in Germany, and there was a company called Bavaria Motor Works, known as BMW. They came to the market and said, well, why Mercedes makes so much money in the US? And they positioned themselves. They said, look, we're going into as another luxury car, it's not going to work. So they positioned themselves as a car that's fun to drive. And BMW sold their cars based on that slogan, driving fun in US. For those of you who live in the US, that's why people most bought BMW at the time. Of course, you have a lot more fun driving a Porsche than BMW. And Porsche come to the market and said, look, we got to tap this market because they could afford our product. They're obviously latecomer. There's two players ahead of them, not to mention General Motors and Ford and Chrysler already in the US. Porsche is probably the very first car they started using Hollywood personality to promote their product. And they positioned themselves, Porsche is not a car. Porsche is a lifestyle. So you have all these cool guys and beautiful women standing next to a convertible, and that's a lifestyle. But the biggest car manufacturer in Germany was not Mercedes-Benz, was not Bavaria Motor Works, was not Porsche. It was a company called Volkswagen. And they come to the US and everybody already have two cars. What are you going to do? They manufacture a small vehicle called Volkswagen Bug. And they tell everybody, if you want to buy another car, and that's the car to get. And they sold more Volkswagen Bug than any other automobile model in the world up to today. So don't worry if you're a latecomer. Position yourself, create a new market, and you change the game.
All great points. I will say that from my experience, a lot of companies, they harp on the, no one's doing this yet, no one's doing this yet. And I often think to myself, wouldn't it be easier just to make something better? So there is obviously space for latecomers and early and essentially market creators as well. So, and I think that goes back to an early stage company is a very dynamic thing. So whatever your strengths are, is something that you should set forward, and there's not just one way to do it. You don't have to be a market creator, and you also don't have to be a latecomer improving upon something or with a much better marketing scheme. I think, and a lot of, considering the times we're in today, marketing may be a lot bigger chunk of the success of a company than the actual product. And those were great examples of maybe you don't really have a product that differs too much, but if you have a marketing strategy that's not been utilized, that's another potential competitive advantage. So it's which brings us to competitive advantages are not just necessarily IP or know-how. It can obviously permeates throughout a company. Another may be talent. So I would pose this to the investor table again in terms of talent. And I know, so we'll go to you first, Bo. When engaging or thinking of engaging an early stage company, it's often, we're usually, I like to think of it as kind of like the first line. Like you have to pitch us to think that you'll actually get funding at some point or that it'll be a successful idea, a successful team. And focusing on the team aspect. Given prior experience or education or know-how, technical skills, and I've also heard a lot of VCs, it's akin to a job interview where it's like, do you get a good feeling from the person? Do you like them? Will you want to work with them in the future, especially if you're an active investor that likes to foster the path of the company? So I guess, Bo, if you could start us off and talk about the talent, the specific skills and characteristics, if you will, of the core team that you've seen be more of a successful team, even in at this point, at this stage, attracting early stage financing.
I think I'll start out by saying that different types of investors will look for different things. A very large investor may have a very different approach to a small investor. For a small investor, maybe your company is already a significant chunk of their money, and so they will look beyond just the tangibles. They won't just look at your metrics. They'll really want to believe in your product. So a really good sales pitch, charismatic sales pitch, may matter quite a lot when you're pitching to a small investor. For a larger investor, they may have already quite a fixed set of metrics that they'll look at. They may even have quite a rigid set of policies. What are they allowed to invest in? What are they not allowed to invest in? What kind of investment structures can they accept? What can they not accept? So to answer the question in terms of identifying talent, it really depends on the investor. Big investors care more about, I think, the legal structures and the tangibles. Smaller investors tend to care more about the intangibles and individual charisma. And I think that also leads to a point that Kenneth mentioned earlier before about intellectual property. So Kenneth mentioned the importance of working out whether big tech still owns IP or whether it's being transferred over to small tech. From the perspective of the investor, I want to know who exactly within small tech owns that IP. Is it the company itself, or is it the individuals? If the individuals own the IP, will they license the IP to the company? At the end of the day, as an investor, I invest in shares in the company. I can't invest in shares in a human being. So I need to be able to trust that if the human being is the one that has the IP, then as the investor in the company, I can have secure access to that IP. And that also is an absolute part of the pitch. If the individual is going to retain the IP and you want an investor to accept a licensing arrangement, you need to really be charismatic and sell that arrangement.
Thank you, Bo. And I think I want to piggyback off of that point and pose a related question to Joseph. I've seen certain instances, I won't say it's very, very common, when there is an entrepreneur, usually very early stage, but also maybe one of their first ventures, where they're hesitant to put the IP that maybe they personally developed into the company for fear that they can be pushed out. Because when you bring in an investor, maybe they have better business minds that they want to run the company, and a lot of new entrepreneurs try to essentially build in a protection plan to keep them involved in the company. I just want to know, in your experience, do you see that often? And do you have any difficulty sometime explaining the separation between obviously person and entity, where the money is going, and how for you there really isn't any value in the company unless it holds the IP, even though you appreciate the concern of a new entrepreneur trying to protect their position within their company?
Actually, it happened more frequently than you think, this kind of situation, okay, especially nowadays. Well, we saw Ian's presentation earlier that many of the founders, they had a technical background and they became businessmen. So you as an entrepreneur with your ideas, with your technology know-hows, you need to grow too, right? You need to be more mature. You need to learn how to run a business with more than 10 people. Because actually that's a good problem for you, right? You're happy your company growed. You're happy you have more employees, you have more revenues. You're happy this can become a more complex business to run. However, not every innovator could do that. That's why it pays that you have good relationship with some of your investors. Because as an investor, obviously, we want to do startups, and we want to keep these guys. They got the talents, they got the ideas, and they founded the company. But unfortunately, many times they're just not a good business person or good business executives. And we ask them, do you mind if you become a CTO of the company rather than the CEO? Even though you found the company? To a lot of people, it was an ego issue. God, I feel like I took a step down, and well, look at Bill Gates. He's not the CEO of the company, right? He hired a CEO. Some people, they're very, very good at technology innovation. They're just not good at running an operation. Also, it pays that you do a bit of homework about the VC or the investors you approach. Have they do this sort of thing before? Any other portfolio company had that kind of history? You want to think hard about this, because many of the founders, they want to hang on to the company. They founded the company. You want to continue to be the chairman and CEO or president. But I think it's both ways, and that is something that you want to learn.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move on, still in company considerations, but now we're going to the existing capitalization of the company. So who owns shares, how many, and we're going to kind of use this to kind of segue into the one of the bigger negotiating points very early on, which is if you're setting a pre-investment money valuation of the company. So that's where my experience has shown is the initial sticking point, because as the company, you have these pie in the sky dreams and you know it's going to work out and you know what the value of your company is today. And then on the other hand, you have the investor who's seen a lot more ideas, seen great ideas and great teams not necessarily be successful. So they have to balance the benefit versus the risk. And oftentimes, I will say, probably almost every time, their evaluation of the value of the company may be slightly less, if not more than slightly less than what the company believes. So we have this, it's a, okay, perfect. So this is the new co-capitalization table. As you can see, you have the three co-founders, CEO, CFO, and CTO, and also there's big tech. They only have what, I apologize for the common shares, ordinary shares here in Hong Kong, and they have an option pool, and there are no options outstanding. There's no preferred shares. This is a nice, clean cap table, and as I'll use this as an opportunity to state that I can't. You can never have too clean of a cap table, especially initially, because if there's any type of discrepancies between the cap table or your related agreements, stock purchase agreements, or with your or subscription agreements, that is going to be an issue once you get past the initial discussion, because investors are going to do due diligence and they're going to make sure that they know who owns how much of the company. Again, so we have this concept of big tech having shares. So the first question, if you're an investor, I'm sure you're thinking, did they pay for those shares? Is it a payment in some sort of licensing or IP arrangement? Like, what was the consideration given for those ordinary shares? Another issue that I've seen more so in my time here has been the incorporation of the option pool in the overall, say, the fully diluted ownership shares. I've had several issues where entrepreneurs did not understand that we had to essentially assign the pool as being outstanding shares. And I don't know if your experience, you've had that issue as well, considering if a new investor's coming in and there's option shares that aren't issued. Since they're reserved, they will logically be issued over time. As you have funds and you bring on talent and you're not paying high-end salaries, you're going to give options. And as a result, if they're not considered prior to the investment as being outstanding, they're just going to subsequently decrease the ownership value of the investor. So I think that's an important part for the entrepreneur to know, because for me, it's been a difficult concept to get across that, yes, no one owns these shares and they're still technically with the company, but because they're authorized, the idea is eventually they will be issued. So that's why I just wanted to have that point there, just to make that statement. But continuing with the company considerations, I wanted to then kind of change to the idea of where is the company going? How, not necessarily just how much money you're looking for, but where does that get you? And it gets you to that milestone. I think another important part to consider is what is the value of the company at that point? So most of the time, you want to do proof of concept, or you want to increase your customer base, or you need 2 or 3 more engineers. I think it's very, very important to specify exactly where that money is going. And also, if you can speak to this, Wilson, initially, is there a such thing as taking too much money initially if you don't necessarily need all of that for whatever your next milestone would be?
From my personal experience, start from like 1-person company to like 10, 20. Every day you can have a startup meeting, but if you have 100 people, you cannot manage this very big group size. So in the company, different stage, the use of money will be different. Like in the very beginning, the money is actually for developing the proof of concept. Okay, and after you have the money, you develop the concept, and then you are going to prove the market, whether the market is here. Okay, so go to market. And then when you successfully get a project, and then you are talking about how you expand your target audience from Hong Kong to international. So in different stage, the use of money, the use of process will be definitely totally different. And also different investors, they have different how they can afford, how much of risk they can take, okay? So if they think about this as angel fund, that means small money, a big chunk of shares, okay? But like if your company are doing very good, like in one market with like 100 people, 10 million Hong Kong to do the operation, and then I give you another 10 million, okay? You can actually expand to another market. Okay, so I give you 100 million, so you can help to expand to like 10 markets. So actually from the owner or major shareholder of the company, actually we don't care too much, myself, I don't care too much about the valuation. Okay, because like for a company, the valuation is like 10 million, I own 100%. But like when the money come in, and then those money can help my company to increase the valuation. And then even though I got like only 60%, I feel very happy on that, okay? So like I think most of you understand like Jack Ma or Pony Ma, okay, they are not the major shareholder of the company. They own like a small percent, but because of the valuation of the company going very big, okay, so this is the cases. Okay, so I think, of course, the negotiation from the potential investor and also the owner of the company, very important is the trust. And the trust comes from you share all your idea, your planning to the investors. And also much more important, many investors, they ask for a boss seat, okay, to be your committee and would like to learn more about how you run your business. And when the money come in, you need to understand, okay, low fee lunch, okay? So the pressure also come from the committee. Okay, so I think the preparation is important, not only about your technology, it's about your mentality. Okay, and I think this is one very important factors, okay, to make your company can be success. Okay, yeah, I think this is something that I would like to share.
And I guess, and Kenneth, if you could speak to, I know later we have a presentation on growth of startups. And I've seen in the past where there is a heavy influx of cash early on because there's a heavy interest or it's a very, very interesting company, that companies, is there a possibility to grow too quickly, to essentially grow outside of your capacity, especially if, say, you have an entrepreneur that's very technically sound but maybe not a business operator and then can't necessarily bring on the correct pieces to keep operations flowing as efficiently as they did as a small team. And if there's a kind of a benefit in breaking down to having short-term goals and then long-term goals and differentiating between what needs to be done now and later, even if you have a larger influx of cash than you initially expected.
Let me share with you a personal story. I mentioned earlier that I was an entrepreneur, and I had co-founded a technology company. Actually, at the time, we were doing ebooks, so similar to tablets of today, of course, not with the level of technology. But at the time, we were having and again, this was before the bubble burst, or just before that. And we were getting money thrown at us. And we didn't want to get diluted. So we were turning down money left and right. We didn't want that many people in. We just want to make sure we maintain a control. And everything worked fine. You know, we had people lined up. And then 9/11 happened. After that, our funding sources dried out, and because of the uncertainty, because obviously our market was, even though we're a Hong Kong company, but our market was the US. And so, and ultimately, just as we needed money the most, we didn't have enough. And so ultimately, we sold to one of our investors, and that was, and the company became a part of that much, much bigger company. And the lesson here is that, is there too much money? Is there not enough money? Well, it is very difficult to say. I mean, for me at the time, for me and my other co-founders, nobody expected 9/11, and we thought, gee, you know, we're doing great. We're going to have money flowing, and we didn't want to get diluted. We want to plan everything, and so at the time we thought we didn't need the money. In hindsight, of course, had we obtained the money, we may have done okay, and we're able to go to the next step with the money for development. And so it's really hard to say, but I think that. In terms of how much money you need, again, it goes back to another point that we've all discussed, is that you need to be able to have a good team, to be able to implement what you want. I mean, I think from the entrepreneur, from a company perspective, you need to know what your goal is. You need to know what you want to do and how to go about it. And in order to do that, you really need a team. You can't be a one-man band and really make it big. You need to have the right team. You need to have the right planning. And because of that, I think that in terms of, and also, if you don't believe in your own plan, if you don't believe what you're doing, if you're not willing to sacrifice for it, your investors won't either. And so I think the idea in terms of how much capital to raise is that you need to have a real clear timeline in order to know what your capital needs are as you grow. I mean, obviously, personally, 9/11, nobody could have predicted that. At least nobody I knew at the time would have predicted that. But other than these situations, I think it's important to plan how much you need. And while people think that, well, there's no such thing as too much money, I've also have seen companies where they did have too much money coming in, and they thought it was very easy. And so what had happened was that took the entrepreneur's focus away from what they're trying to do. And so the bottom line, keep your focus, know what you're doing, know what your timeline is, and then try to raise money accordingly. And of course, sometimes if there's available money to come in, you can also work with the investors. You know, instead of have all the money flowing in at once, have tranches and have an agreement as to how much the investors will commit and at what time. And then, and if you're really good, you can also negotiate the valuation as each tranche come in, because the way you do that is a lot of times by milestone. You achieve certain things, then you get money in at a certain valuation. So there are various things you can do, but the important thing is, the bottom line is, you need to be able to implement your plan, because no matter how great your technology, how great everything is, if you can't implement, it's not worth anything.
Thank you, thank you. So now we'll move forward to the investor considerations. And so I'd like to start off, Joseph, if you could, I don't know if you have like a checklist or bullet points when you're presented with pitches and slide decks, but if there is a way that you could try to summarize the more important parts of an investment, and we're moving on beyond the IP and the team, and I'm looking more to the economics of the deal from the investor's point of view. If you have any type of range of time where you want an exit, if there's any type of more attractive, obviously the most attractive exit is an IPO, but if there's any type of strategies given to, say, a company like our test company that has a B2B relationship in the tech industry, CEO's former employee of a bigger technology company that is now currently being competed with by the startup's #1 customer. In scenarios like that, does that essentially increase the odds that you may invest, knowing that there may be an M&A deal on the horizon? Is that something that you allow to factor into essentially weighing the benefits and risks of entering into an investment?
Well, valuation could be a very sticky point. My advice would be, first of all, I totally appreciate from the entrepreneur's perspective. You know, this is my baby. I had the idea. I had a, Apple moment, and I created this great solution. But when negotiate valuation, please try to not take it personally. All right. I think that's the #1 rule you want to keep in mind. It's not about how much your brain is worth. No, we don't look at it that way. We look at the individual, we look at the technology, plus you'll also shop around anyway. You probably talk to a lot more investors than just us. And you get a sense of what market's valuation is like. And you can also compare your solution, especially a software company. There's a lot of companies in that space. What their valuation is like as a comparable, and what makes you a lot more valuable. And also, it's healthy, especially for VCR size, that merger acquisition is a very reasonable exit. And then we will look at the individual, that whether he has a big ego, he wants to hang on to this. If he's that type of a CEO, we will have a second thought about that. Because when you merge with a bigger company, you're more likely to have a smaller role, and they want to retain you for 2 or 3 years. And could you be a team player, or do you must be the boss, right? If a guy, he's too much in love with his invention, that's a red flag for VC. We're never going to exit, right? I'm sorry, we love people who has passion, but having passion about a business, then have a big, huge ego about his invention is very different. So I guess Steve Jobs learned that lesson. That's why he got kicked out Apple. You just can't do that. And you have to think, this is a business. It's not about you. It's not about your great idea. It's a fabulous idea. You're great. You found this company, but don't take these valuation negotiation personally.
I guess, and to piggyback off of that idea of having the very super passionate entrepreneur that wants to keep hold of their company, and Bo, maybe you can chime in on this in terms of legally when you're coming to structure a deal. Say that the company was too good to pass up, and you're still going to make this investment. Is there any way to essentially protect the investor, or what would the investor's essentially concerns be to ensure that in the event that there was a potential M&A deal or some sort of exit, that they would not be essentially handcuffed by the CEO of the company?
Sure. As an investor, I want to have some legal protections. I want to know what I can have a say over in terms of the company's future plans. If, for example, you want to introduce new investors, will I have a say in whether you can do that? Will I have some anti-dilution protections? If you want to sell to a particular investor, do I agree with selling to that investor? Can I veto some things? You want to really consider all of these and maybe put them down in writing in a contract. I also want to know, as an investor, whether you have a legal structure in place already that is conducive to these future plans. If you want to do an IPO, can you do an IPO on the basis of your current structure, or do you have plans of putting in that structure in the future? I also want to know where you're going to sell your product to. In Hong Kong, most companies rarely focus just on the Hong Kong market. You tend to think about selling to the mainland. The mainland tends to have some restrictions on foreign investment, on foreign businesses. So do you have a product that can be sold there, or do you have a legal structure that allows you to sell there? I want to know all of these things when I come in. Sometimes startups don't have these plans in place already. This is where, if the investor comes in, I may make some demands about putting in place these structures before I give you my money.
Very good points. Thank you. So, and it was mentioned both by Kenneth and Joseph, the pre-money valuation, or the valuation of the company. And with our final 4 minutes, this is kind of, we mentioned it's the sticking point initially and the real negotiation point early on. So I wanted to, Kenneth mentioned the milestone concept. Potentially taking on money at this stage, not giving up as much as your company as may be requested from an investor, but having a milestone that at that point you would take additional money under the understanding that you most likely will have an increased valuation, therefore you won't be giving up the same percentage of the company. So Joseph, in your experience, and it seems like you had some pretty tenuous pre-money valuation negotiations. If that was proposed, have you used that as kind of a middle road if you're too far apart, where we'll split the difference or come up with some essentially mitigate the difference between the parties and try to get to a milestone later on where the economics are a lot closer?
Actually, we embrace the milestone mechanism. It's a great concept, and it serves both ways. But we often ask another question. So look, if you're trying to raise $2 million, for instance, we would ask you, if you have $4 million, what would you do? Right? You better have some answer. When you're out there raising money, say, look, I have a long-term view of the company, and if we have funding or we have generated revenue ahead of the schedule, what's our plan? That tells us a lot about you as a business leader, as a strategic thinker, and also it just gives us more comfort. The milestone concept is great, but it depends on how do you define or structure these milestones, right? And that's very important. Try to think this way. The VCs or whoever your investor is, no one wants to take your company. We don't know how to run a new software solution company. Right? We need you to run the company. Right? They're not here to hostile take over your company. No. We're here to make sure that you are successful. That's why our investment will be safe. And so it has to be a win-win arrangement. Right? It's good for the entrepreneur, also it serves the interest of your investor.
And I guess for the last point, I'll bring it back to Wilson. The company standpoint and the pre-money valuation. I know you mentioned earlier that initially you did not.
For a company, if they are going to get some funding from the market, there should be a reason of on how to use those money. Okay, if a company is actually planning for IPO, for going through the process, okay, it used most of their profit, okay, in the past 2 years maybe. So I don't. Of course, I agree totally with Kenneth. If you give me like 10 million, I know how to use those money. If you give me 100 million, of course, more money can get more good people, do a better marketing, promotions, of course, is important. But also responsibility is also important, okay? Because from the investor point of view, when they invest like 100 million into your company, okay, with a valuation, for at this moment, if like after 1 year, okay, can you give them a good return? I think this is also important. So it is meaningless if you just keep saying that, okay, your company valuation is very high, okay. I don't think this is a good negotiation. So I think a proper and a long-term growth, like at least 2 or 3 years planning, and finally you can, with the target, I think that will be much more important, not only for this company. Maybe in later stage, you spin off another company, you ask for another funding from the same group of investors. I think the trust is built up based on all this. I think this is important as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, if I can, to summarize your point, it's less about the actual valuation at the initial stage and more about where it will be as a result of the funding you get in it. And I think it kind of echoes a lot of the sentiments that have been going on in this discussion, where it's all about having a solid plan and preparing yourself to know it's, you can't predict 9/11. There will be a lot of market conditions you don't necessarily predict. But what you can do is control the company and know what you're doing. And so you can essentially project that we will be successful, and it may ease the initial pain of the valuation if you're thinking more long term and stating, well, if we get this money, I'm confident in our team, and you portray this to the investor that you will get a great return, and then at that point when we need another influx of cash, you're going to give us a better deal because we are going to essentially prove what we told you at this point, which that is, I think that's a great way to, especially initially in your first financing, because a lot of times you just need the money in the door and you don't have the luxury all the time of having a lot of investors and being able to turn it down. But with that, I want to thank the participants. This has been a great discussion. I think it was very, very informative. I'd also like to invite Mr. Ian Huang to the stage at this point for the photo opportunity. But could everyone just join me in a round of applause for the participants? I think they had a great... I think Ian's approaching now. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. good? Thanks, Bo. Appreciate it. Appreciate the help. Got a lot of stuff there. Okay. So now, yeah, thank you. Round of applause again for the panel. Appreciate it. So now we will be taking a break for lunch. The afternoon session begins at 2:30, so just go find something to eat, refresh yourself. And we have an expert panel right at the end of lunch, so I'm sure it'll be very, very interesting, so you don't want to miss that. And then we have one more speech after that, so we just welcome you to go find lunch in the area and then back here at 2:30. Thank you.